Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beginner's Mind series. This particular episode is focused on helping you improve your communication skills in a cross-cultural setting, and your spoken English. We've had a lot of queries regarding this subject, and one of the videos which we produced got a great response, which was, it wasn't done by us intentionally. We did not decide that we wanted to do a video on that topic. We experiment, as we usually do, with the Coach on Campus series. And a lot of you subscribers must already be familiar with the fact that this particular one on developing your communication skills has almost exceeded 10 million views. So not in our wildest imagination we could have ever thought that was possible. And since our mission always has been to serve the community, whether it's young students in universities across here in India, or virtually to people in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, other parts of the world, it has been our vision, it's been our intention to help you with the resources that you need to succeed in your personal and professional lives. And a lot of it has had to do with the confidence to articulate your ideas well, to be able to interact with people from different parts of the world, and to learn from them and to share your message with them. And with that in mind, we have another series to help, another episode to help you improve your communication skills and to help you learn and exchange ideas with the best and the brightest in the world. I have a couple of requests before I introduce our special guest today, from whom you're going to learn a lot, and therefore the extra emphasis and a couple of pointers to help you learn better. Treat this as a masterclass in improving your communication skills, if you will, please. I have three important things to share with you. Number one, please understand learning depends upon your state of mind. So take a few moments, if you would like, to take a deep breath in. And just make sure you're centered and you're balanced. And you also have all the tools available to you to take notes if you like, pen and paper. And you can pause the video whenever you like and begin it once again from wherever you left. As I said before, I say again, treat this as a masterclass in improving your communication skills. So ensure that you're in the right state of mind. Ensure you're in a peaceful, quiet location. Ensure you have a pen and paper handy. Number two, please understand, learning improves when you're engaged, when you're involved in the discussion. So here's what I will ask you to do. Your top takeaways from different questions that I will ask our special guest today, can you please share them in the comments section below, right? So my top takeaways from overcoming the fear of speaking a foreign language are 1, 2, and 3. If you could share those, that'll be great. It helps us to start a conversation in the comments section, as well as to help reinforce the key learning points for all of you viewers out there. Number 3, please learn this material with the intention of teaching it to someone else. This is one of the most powerful exercises I've done in many of my workshops. I say to people, towards the end of this, if there's a table of 10, I usually give them a little challenge, and I'm throwing that challenge across to you as well. If you accept it, you can type in challenge accepted, and this is my challenge to you. Towards the end of my workshops, I ask one among the 10 on a table of 10 to be a volunteer and to be the coach or the trainer for that particular table. That person will come at the 6 o'clock position of that table and will be given 3 to 5 minutes to be the coach or be the trainer for that particular group of people, and to reinforce and summarize the key learning points. I have found that people who volunteer for this activity are way more engaged than the others, and they do a great job at capturing the summary. And since peer-to-peer learning is happening, and I already see in a lot of the conversations in the comment section, a lot of you are helping each other out. There's like a little community building on our YouTube channel, which I really like. So those were the 3 little instructions I hope you will follow in order to improve your learning outcomes for this episode here today. Let me now introduce our special guest today, Mr. Keith O'Hare, who has worked in education internationally for over 20 years. He started as a teacher in France, in Italy, and moved on to Spain. Then in 2002, he became a director of studies for a school in China. So a lot of international experience there, if you can see, France, Italy, Spain, and China. From 2004 to 2017, Keith worked with the British Council in Asia as a teacher trainer in China, as a project manager in China, as a deputy director of English in Taiwan, and a director of English education programs in Malaysia. He's currently based out of sunny Spain and now runs the very popular website called Keith Speaking Academy. We'll share the link in the description, and a YouTube channel called English Speaking Success. I love his videos. They're simple actionable, and very engaging. He also offers online courses to students who want to improve their spoken English. His main focus is helping students worldwide, all of you who are tuning in right now, to prepare for the IELTS exam so they can get the score that they need and live out their dreams, whether it's immigration, career success, study abroad, or promotion. Keith, you're welcome to the show.
Wow. Thank you very much, Simerjeet. Absolute pleasure to be here, or it's an honor to be here with you. Thank you very, very much for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here to share some ideas.
It's a pleasure, Keith, and I'd like to say a big thank you. You've been very generous. We approached you at a very short notice. You said yes, and we're so excited to have you here with your vast experience and some very popular videos on the subject of improving communication skills and English language. Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. Let's jump right into the subject matter, shall we? Yeah.
Sure.
In my experience, Keith, if I talk about the Indian subcontinent, we've had a lot of engineers. We produce a lot of doctors, R&D professionals, IT professionals. We export a lot of talent across the world. Some of the CEOs of the top companies in the Silicon Valley happen to be of Indian origin. So there is no shortage of technical skills, technical expertise here in the Indian subcontinent, where a lot of our young viewers who are highly interested in the subject, they come from. We are a culture also very high on agreeability and getting along, and I think that sort of plays a little factor there. What happens, the end outcome is we have a generation of people, a lot of engineers, a lot of technically proficient people who are very good on the technical stuff, but somehow lack the confidence or the ability or the skill or the will, and we'll talk about all the aspects of this, to present their ideas well in a way that they feel that they're making an impact. I'd like to start with your views on this subject. How can people who have great ideas, so there's not a shortage of ideas, but there is some gap in between there, how can they cover this gap and unleash their full potential?
Wow, that's a really, really interesting question. And I totally agree. There's a lot of people, as you say, from the Indian and from Asia who are working in the West or in America and England, Australia, and struggle with communication skills. And I think it's a real challenge. I think on the one hand, it's partly to do with confidence in their own English, but it may also be to do with their communication ability and how well they communicate. The two are connected, but they're a bit different.
Right.
I think with English skills, some people struggle in their self-belief, in really being confident that they can speak English well and they can speak well enough to communicate. And I think sometimes this comes from education and from schooling and the way we're taught at school. In many countries, learning a language is seen as a very academic subject, and this is the way you do it. And many people get this mindset that I wasn't very good at languages at school. I can't study. I don't know how to speak English. I had the same issue with French, right, at school. I mean, interesting thing with me when I was learning French at school, when I did the O levels, kind of at the middle stage, I got a C, which was a very low level, and I wanted to go on to study French for A level in university. And my teachers said, "Oh, really? I mean, you're not very good at French. Why don't you do maths? Because you're much better at maths." and I lost confidence because of that, and I guess realizing also that the way that languages are taught, not everybody learns languages in that way.
Right.
I went on to learn French at university, and through different experiences, I discovered you can learn languages in different ways. And just because you weren't good at school doesn't mean you can't be successful learning language beyond school.
Right.
So I think it's as you often said, it's the mindset, having the right mindset and belief in your ability to do it. If you think, that you can't study and learn a language, it's probably going to be true, right? Whereas if you start thinking, well, I can, and I'm able to do this, then you can start making progress.
That makes a lot of sense, because what you just mentioned about, the education or the labels or how well you've done in school, and you convert them into self-fulfilling beliefs, self-fulfilling prophecies. It's you who makes that statement saying, oh, I probably didn't learn English early enough in order to be proficient now, and therefore I can never do it. That's very well said. And I, throughout all the videos and all the other motivational stuff that we produced, and it's not just about learning a new language, any self-limiting belief can be and should be challenged. I think that's the greatest project you'll ever undertake in self-transformation, communication skills, or learning a new language. So great point there, Keith. And what I'll urge our viewers to do is maybe sit down with pen and paper and try to identify what are the limiting beliefs, what is your enemy, who are you fighting against. As you just mentioned your own example, perhaps off the cuff remark by a teacher who said, you're probably not good at that, so you should try this. Are you holding on to that? Or is it a bad test score, or is it something else? Once you know it, you can challenge that, and that brings me to a very important question, Keith. I've always believed mindset is the first step. I spend a lot of time visualizing my keynote speeches before I go on stage. I can see myself in my mind's eye interacting with the audience, having a good time. It's flowing effortlessly. What I wanted to convey is being received well by the audience, and that helps. That helps. Not in the academic way, it's not but sometimes I do get insights also, but it prepares me and sort of calms me down, so it's a very, very good exercise. And I feel what that exercise helps me do is overcome the mindset challenges. And you've spent a lot of time teaching English to non-native speakers across the world, more than 20 years, France, Italy, Spain, and China. Have you identified a list of limiting beliefs or maybe mindset challenges that students must overcome first before they go about learning the language or communication skills?
Yes. Oh, yes, for sure. Mm-hmm. And I think the number one is probably epitomized by a student I had in France who said to me, Keith, I need to learn English. Mm-hmm. I'm ready to work as hard as I have to. Even if I hate all the grammar, I'm going to learn English.
Nobody likes the grammar.
I stood back and I thought, hang on, even though you hate all the grammar, it's like the mindset was that English is hard, it's difficult, it's boring, it's a headache, but I'll push through, right? No pain, no gain. Mm-hmm. And I think that is not nonsense, but it's not true. It's the wrong mindset.
It's the wrong strategy.
And it's the wrong strategy. And I'm a big, big believer, and I push this with my teaching and with my videos, is that learning English can be fun. And not only can it be fun, but it should be fun. And the more that you enjoy your learning, the better you will learn. And there's a lot of research on that. I mean, there's the affective filter by Stephen Krashen, and he talks about the more stressful you are, the more your learning goes down because the affect goes down.
Indeed.
But if you are relaxed, you enjoy learning more. And I think that's the key mindset is to think, actually, I can enjoy this. And therefore I'm able to learn better. Right. And I do notice a lot of students say that to me, that they've suddenly had a learning changing, maybe not a life changing, but a learning changing moment where they go, wow, I actually enjoy learning English with you. And that's it. That's great. That's the first great thing.
Right.
So I think that's one of the first mindsets, right, is to enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Is to, rather than, as you rightly said, to consider it a really uphill task. It's like maybe going to the gym early on a very cold morning. And the best part about doing that is getting up at 7 a.m. and deciding not to go to the gym. That's always the best part of is because...
That's right. And also, I mean, people say, like, when you go to the gym, the best part is after you finish the gym, after you finish the hard work and you feel better. And again, I think it's maybe an unfair analogy for learning languages. I think it's not that once you've learned English, you'll be good. It's the process. It's the journey of learning, which is exciting. And once you get into that this is not just a means to an end. This is what I'm doing. It's the process, which is great. Then it changes your way of thinking as well.
Absolutely. And there's variety of resources available to make it fun. You could use Netflix, or you could read, or you could write, or you could interact with people from across the world thanks to all these digital tools that we have. You could talk to native English speakers and learn from them, or have your own little group, and to exchange information that you have. So there's a lot of resources now available for people to make it fun and interesting, as opposed to maybe 20 years ago when it was more theoretical, academic in nature. That's one of the things that came to my mind. And our podcast, Keith, is titled "The Beginner's Mind," and this comes from the Japanese philosophy called Shoshin. In Zen, they talk about, and one of the proverbs goes something like this: "In the expert's mind, there are only a few possibilities. In the beginner's mind, there are many." And I love that. I've been driven by that personally. And I think the same, if you'll agree with me, is applicable to learning English as well, is that there are many ways that might work for you, and go with those multiple possibilities and explore which one works the best. I'm not sure, perhaps you might have seen this movie. It was around this young girl preparing for the Spelling Bee Championship. She has a coach who helps her make that breakthrough. I can't remember the name. Maybe if our viewers are familiar, let us know. Help me, remind me in the comment section. But what he helps Keith, this young little girl, to do is she was an avid dancer as well. So the coach identifies this learning style, and he gets her to memorize these words while she's dancing or moving instead of sitting. And he would even encourage her to do the same while she's on stage. And, is the same end destination, but a different process, as you rightly said, and the one that she enjoyed. So thank you so much for that.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree. A very good teacher will identify the different learning styles of the student and be able to adapt to that student, which is the great thing of having a teacher directly help you. But I love the idea of the Shoshin as well, the idea that you should be open to every moment being a new moment.
Right.
And I think that helps break the mindset that I can't learn English, that if you think, well, every moment is an opportunity to learn, what's gone in the past doesn't mean that's going to go in the future.
Right.
Every moment is a new moment to try. So being open, I think, is helpful.
Indeed. And I love what you talked about. When we are stressed, we don't learn as much. I noticed that, and this is for everybody who's tuning into this conversation right now. When you're learning, try to be as relaxed as possible. Try to be in the moment. They have a name for it. It's called deep work. Also, I'm currently reading that book, but very, very powerful philosophy. Switch off your social media, remove the distractions, and then immerse yourself into it. That's worked well when you're not stressed. I practice this while interviewing people, Keith, and I try to, in many of my recent ones, I usually try to just maybe close my eyes and take all that information in, as opposed to earlier, the next question would be running in my head. As an outcome, what would happen is I was there, but I was not fully there. So now I just pause and absorb it in. So not being stressed about what's coming next helps you fully absorb what's happening in the moment. So it improves your overall efficiency.
I totally agree. It's a great skill that you have. I'm still developing that skill. I think it's such a valuable one. And it's valuable for interviews when, for example, the IELTS test or for a job interview, to be able to be in the moment rather than planning your prepared speech. Is a very, very, it's a challenging skill, but it's such a valuable one. It's worth practicing.
Yeah, because then you're dynamic. You actually listen to what is being said and you respond with, at the moment, not what you already planned before, and your brain is not working overtime. So. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Helps
I'd
us
love
relax.
to talk about the fears. Why is there a huge fear around? I understand. Well, learning a new skill, we have this uncertainty of what the outcome is going to be all about. But non-native speakers of the English language, as well as people who feel they need to improve their communication skills, there's a lot of fears around the subject. Read one interesting survey which said. Fear of public speaking is above on many surveys, ahead of the fear of death itself. So,
Yes.
which technically translates that some people would rather be dead than be on a stage in front of a group of people, being vulnerable and sharing their thoughts. Why is this? There's a huge fear around this subject, and how have you sort of calmed this fear down in your students over the years?
Yeah. Well, imagine if the fear of public speaking. Imagine the fear of public speaking in a foreign language. That's probably like dying twice, maybe for some people. I think that fear, from my experience as a student and from teaching other students, one of the biggest fears is around looking stupid by making mistakes. So I'm going to speak, I'm going to make mistakes. People will think I'm stupid, that I will feel stupid and be embarrassed. And being embarrassed publicly is very damaging for people. And so making mistakes is one of the biggest fears. And students struggle and try to speak perfectly. And because they're doing that, their fluency drops and their communication disappears, right? Because they're spending so much time thinking preposition plus the adjective, and then they're not getting their idea out.
Right.
I think so. The really important thing to understand about mistakes in language learning is that they are big gifts, presents to us. They help us. They're an essential part of the learning process. If you're not making mistakes, you're not learning. Simple as that. So you need to learn to accept you're going to make mistakes, and that when mistakes come, it's absolutely fine. You can learn from them. If you get feedback in some way to tell you what the mistake is, you can learn from it and improve.
Right.
But we're all going to make mistakes, right? It's like in business, you're going to fail. You are going to fail at times, and just accept that will happen, and that it's a positive thing. Mistakes are not failures; they're growing opportunities. So I think if you can make friends with mistakes, then it helps overcome that fear that I'm going to make mistakes.
Right.
And the fear of looking stupid is a psychological thing. You're preempting, you're second guessing that the audience out there, whoever it is, even if it's a manager who's from America, is going to think I'm stupid because I don't speak as good as well as a native speaker. Don't second guess people. I guarantee 90% of those people will not be thinking that. They'll be thinking the opposite, actually. It's like, wow, you're trying really hard. I want you to be successful with your English.
Yeah.
So don't second guess what people will be thinking of and about you. Because it's normally wrong, I think, in my experience.
Indeed. Yeah, usually is. Yeah. Usually is. Do you know, I deeply admired this gentleman. He passed away a couple of years back, Dr. Wayne Dyer from the US, spiritual author. Okay. And I used to listen to a lot of his talks before going to sleep. In 2007, 2008, I had this habit. Those iPods that came back in the day with the actual hard disk, the really heavy ones. So I had one of those. I had all his talks downloaded. And he said something very interesting in one of his talks. He said, if there's 1,000 people in the auditorium, and once I finish my talk, they're walking away with 1,000 different opinions. That's 1,000 different opinions about what I said. And none of them it's possible that no one is true. None of them is true, right? So for me to carry that burden of those 1,000 opinions is a very heavy burden to carry. So I think we need to liberate ourselves from that. And what you rightly said is the more we try to be perfect, our brain, we sort of use all this processing ability of the brain for perfection, and therefore speed suffers, ideas suffer, content suffers, knowledge suffers. I've seen a lot of professors from different parts of the world, not just India, from other parts of Europe and other places where English is not the first language, and they perhaps even till date they struggle with great English, grammatically correct English. However, because the focus is not on getting it 100% right, the focus is not showing off his linguistic ability, the ideas shine through. And in some domains, maybe that's more important than great grammar, for example, right? So
without it.
Yeah. And I think it's really important for youngsters, especially, to get this fear of being judged away off their shoulders, and you'll feel you're so much lighter. And as you rightly said, what you're thinking that the other person is thinking about you. Perhaps it's your own imagination, so you need to remove that and just focus on expressing what you want to say. And with time and practice, and that's what happened with my learning curve, with time and practice, perhaps you say it in a fewer words, with brevity, perhaps you say it more effectively, and it improves. The only way to overcome this fear, in my case, and from my personal experience, has been to put myself more and more into situations where I'm stretched way outside my comfort zone, way outside my comfort zone. and that strengthens that muscle. Your thoughts on that, Keith? Yeah, you've been in a lot of multicultural
I partly agree in that what I do is I nudge students to go a little bit beyond their comfort zone. I think with language, not to go too far outside because they may drown. Or maybe I'm too overprotective, but to push them to go a little bit outside their comfort zone, to try and do little challenges, whatever they are. If you're going abroad, or even if you're not abroad, to go and ask a question, to be at a conference and ask a question, put your hand up and ask the question. To go and speak to somebody at a party and just introduce yourself. Little things that you wouldn't normally do, and just try and do them. And then see what happens and see how you feel afterwards. And most times people feel great after they've done that, even though it didn't go as they thought it went, as they thought it, or they wanted it to. It doesn't matter too much. They feel very, very good after it. And that reminds me, I think one of the things that I learned as a presenter when I had to do a lot of presentations, when I began presenting education projects to government officials and I used to get nervous about making mistakes in the presentation. And then my mentor or my boss said to me, he said, the people watching you, they had no idea what your script was. They didn't know what you wanted to say. They just received what you said. And that mistake, actually, they didn't know. They weren't aware. And being able to kind of release your script and just deliver. Well, that was a big changing moment for me. I thought, oh my God, that's true. They don't know what I wanted to say, so it doesn't matter. Yeah.
So it's being in the moment. I love that. I can completely relate with that because there was a time when I would prepare for my keynotes and I knew, my top focus area, number 1, number 2, number 3, and which was very helpful, by the way, to keep the entire 45, 60-minute presentation on track and not to go off track with stories or anecdotes or audience interaction. Tends to happen with a large audience. You can easily go off track. However, at the same time, I had to learn to release that, the sequence, and, I gotta say, in point 1, I have to say these 3 things. You don't have to say it all. And there's so many ideas that come once you're off stage. Oh, I wish I could have. And that means a lot remains to be said for the next time. So you're not completely bored with the with the next presentation. Yeah. So it's all a learning process. I've picked some of the top mindset. I wouldn't say mindset blocks, or maybe learning hurdles that a lot of youngsters usually leave in the comment section on our channel. And I'd love to hear your views on them. Number 1 on that list is, can I still learn a new language at 21, 22? I haven't learned English as a language in school, but now at my workplace, it's really important. That particular guy or that person who came he or she did not have as much experience as I did, but speaks English fluently and therefore is moving ahead. Can I still learn? What are your thoughts on that, Keith?
Oh my God, 22? That's so young. Come on, seriously?
All right.
Listen, personal examples. My father began learning Spanish at age 60.
Okay.
And he did that because at the time I was living in Spain and he was coming visiting and he wanted to learn how to communicate. He got up to an A2, B1 level at the time. I began learning Chinese at 30.
Oh, wow.
And I can speak at an intermediate level. I did the HSK Chinese exam, official exams. Of course you can. Of course you can is the absolute answer. It's true to some extent that our ability to learn language diminishes as we get older because our memory is weaker and our network of thinking is more hardwired. But I think especially if you already speak one or two languages, adding extra languages gets easier,
Right.
whatever the age. And I think one of the great benefits of being in India is that many people are at least bilingual, right? They speak dialects or other languages. Unlike the British, who are notoriously monolingual and rubbish at languages, because we don't have that experience so much, generalizing a bit. So I think, the answer is absolutely yes, you can. And there's a lot of research about this, that there's a fallacy. And we've tried to explain this to governments, but they refuse to listen. There's a fallacy that it's easier to learn a foreign language if you begin at primary school level at age 6, rather than beginning at age 12 at secondary school. In all the research, it's shown when students who begin learning a language at age 12 in secondary school, after 2 years, they have already caught up to the same level as those who began at age 6.
Oh, wow.
And the reason is because those in primary school, because they're not immersed 100% in the language, they only get 3 or 4 hours a week. It makes no difference. It doesn't work.
Right.
It only works if you're 100% immersed in the language from a young age. Otherwise, start later. Start at age 12, and you can still become extremely proficient by the age of 20. Start at 20, you can become advanced even. And absolutely.
That's great news. That's great news for everybody who's thinking, perhaps I've missed that particular golden, time to start. And I love what you said. Would it be correct to assume that immersion is one of the keys in learning well, learning quickly?
By and large, yes. I mean, it does depend on the learning style and each individual person. I am a fan of immersion learning. I think it's very, very beneficial because it takes away translation. It encourages you to think in the language, and I think that's incredibly valuable. But it doesn't suit everybody, and you don't have to be immersed to learn the language. But yes, I think there is research that it is beneficial.
This whole, I've seen a lot of videos around this and emphasis on being able to think in that language before you speak well. What's the research on that? What are your views on that? How important is it? And what are your top tips of how people can practice it? Thinking in the language.
Thinking in the language. I think it is very, very important to do that from an early stage, to try and think in the language, because translation slows you down. Right. Especially as a beginner and intermediate level. Once you're at an advanced level, then translation can help. And translation is a skill. It's a very highly trained skill. People study translation, right? But if you're beginning in a language or at an intermediate level, getting away from translation is really important. And so learning to think in the language, I think, is very, very important. Because languages are different. And if you translate word for word, you're going to misunderstand idioms, phrasal verbs, collocations. The rules of the language are different. Right. I think tips to do that, yes, there are. It's one of the most popular videos on YouTube, right? How to think in English. I've seen lots of YouTubers do that. Right. And some very good tips and advice there. It's harder than you think. I don't think it's something you can do just by watching a video. I think it does take a lot of practice. But I mean, there are simple steps you can take. For example, using a monolingual dictionary is one. Right. That's something I did when I was learning Spanish, and it helped me enormously. Not as a beginner, but a bit beyond beginner. Okay. The other thing, yes, is absolutely to immerse yourself in films, in conversations with people of that language, if possible. So if you can, I mean, nowadays, as you said, you can get on the internet, you can go to a website like SpeakWiz, where you can join groups of people for free speaking English. And you're not with people of your own nationality, so you're not translating and using your own language. You're just using English. Then that helps as well, practicing with that. there are other techniques you can do thinking English. I've got a whole video on it if you want to go and watch
Sure,
it.
no, we'll share the link for
send out
that.
the link for people.
Yeah, yes, please.
Yeah.
We're sure we'll do that. I just want to dwell on this a little bit, what you just said about learning to think in English. And what worked really well for me when I rewinded back to my own school days was a lot of self-talk in that language. So if don't do it in public though, guys. So self-talk is best done when you're alone and in private. So if you would have a conversation with yourself, you learned something, you saw something, you heard something, you read something. Reading in particular was very useful because I'm then doing the scenario building inside my head from what I've ever learned. I try to construct an image. I'm more a visual person. So that would really help if I've read a text and I'm creating that scene in my head. And then if in my alone time, in my me time, if I could, during that time, if I could talk about what I just learned to myself out aloud, that would help improve things. And perhaps, guys, give it a try. See how if that works for you. Let us know. Self-talk in the language that you're trying to learn, in English, for instance, that is the subject of our discussion here today. Really helpful. One of the next objections or, points of confusion for youngsters who are starting on this journey of learning English and improving their communication skills is, where do I start? There's a lot of information on the internet. There's so many videos, a lot of courses. So there's actually a challenge of having too much. So Keith, would you help us narrow down to what might be the first 2 or 3 steps for somebody who's trying to start this journey?
Yeah, starting the journey. I guess, well, the first thing you should do is decide your goal. What do you want to achieve, right?
Okay.
Do you want to learn English just to go on holiday in the country and get by? Mm-hmm. Do you want to study in that language and therefore have a higher level? Mm-hmm. Do you want to do a PhD in that language? I mean, what's your goal with learning English? And be clear. And then that can help you decide where to go. I think if you're a beginner starting out in a language, where do you start? I would strongly recommend getting a teacher or a tutor, somebody who can guide you, basically. I think it's unfortunate that nowadays with social media, we're bombarded with a lot of myths and confusion about language learning, and distractions and people, there's a lot of talks about tips and tricks and secrets about language
shortcuts.
learning, and people are clicking and shortcuts. We're in the hack culture, as they call it. Everyone's looking for a quick fix.
Right.
The truth is, the reality is, I think, is that if you want to go from being a beginner to an intermediate, there are very simple steps to follow the kind of language you need to learn, the skills you need to develop. Any reputable course, and there are plenty out there, but looking for a name that's reputable, whether it's, I don't know, Berlitz, British Council, Rosetta Stone, any kind of reputable course, it is just a matter of following the course, because you can't get round the fact you need to learn a certain amount of language. Certain number of words, a certain number of expressions, and to be able to have the skills, the 4 skills of reading, listening, writing, and speaking, and to develop all of those. So I think it's trying to avoid this world of secrets and tips and tricks and say, right, I need to actually just follow this course. But do it if you can be engaged with other people. I mean, I'm a big fan of going to classes, because when I learned Spanish and Chinese, I went to class with several other people in the class. That motivation, that interaction with other students who are going on the same journey is so helpful, right?
Indeed.
They can support you. You can share your frustration. You can share your whatever you're feeling at the time, and you can practice with them. So I think that's really, that motivation is so important. So maybe having the attitude of being in for the long haul. I'm going to study for a long time.
Sure.
Having a tutor and a guide, if possible, a clear goal and motivation, I think, are all important.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. And I completely agree with that. This culture of hacks and try this. And we've had on YouTube, especially in the Indian continent, this has become a very lucrative thing. If you publish a video which says, do this and you'll be more fluent in 7 days, and that's right there, millions of views right there. And a lot of people fall for it, just as they fall for quick weight loss techniques or other things like that. But it doesn't happen overnight. And there are strategies that could help speed things up for you. But as Keith rightly said, prepare to be in it for the long haul, guys, which means you probably might not see the results immediately. There's a great book which is not directly connected to learning English, but is connected to achieving long-term goals. It's Atomic Habits by James Clear.
I love James Clear.
Do you? And it's nice, very actionable, practical things there. And I love what I think he mentioned something about lead measures and lagging measures. So the lead measure is what you're doing today, what the inputs are. The lagging measures are the outcomes. If you're looking only at the outcomes and not following the lead measures, you will end up with zero outcome sometime from now, which means although as much as outcomes are exciting, as much as improvement, the end results are exciting, but if you just stick to those and you focus exclusively on those, you would have sort of lost focus on what you still need to continue doing today in order to produce those results effectively. So it could be do the things that which give you the return in the long run. Does that make your thoughts?
Not just the short run as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that ties in with also the idea of enjoying your learning. If you're enjoying your learning, you're not thinking about getting it out of the way and getting to the end as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. You're actually wanting to engage in long-term learning because it's very enjoyable to do.
Right.
And the outcomes after that, for my students, the outcomes are not just passing the test. Yep. They're being able to communicate effectively abroad, living a more richer life, understanding other cultures. I mean, eventually world peace. I mean, it goes on and on.
Indeed. It begins within a peace, always. The journey begins within.
Yes.
Yeah. Help me out, Keith, with a little comparison. In countries where English is not the first language, so India, for example, right now, the learning techniques, the focus is originally on the rules, on the grammar, the vocabulary, the spelling, etc. Is the method different? I'm assuming, because when I wasn't taught the words, the spelling, the grammar, or the rules of my mother tongue, which happens to be Punjabi, and the national language, Hindi, which I'm fluent in as well. Both of these languages, I did not learn the spelling and the other things, or the rules of grammar, etc. I picked up the language first. I was fluent in the language already, because I'm immersed in it. My parents, I hear it on the TV everywhere. There's that. That's my only medium of communication, connection to the outside world. And then I go to classes and I refine my language and learn better words and know the rules of grammar, etc. I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel this overemphasis on learn the grammar, the rules, the vocabulary, the spelling, etc., first, and then we'll think about the practical day-to-day use. I think that's doing more harm than good. What are your thoughts on this?
Totally agree. It's totally upside down. It's topsy-turvy. And this used to be the way in the UK, for learning foreign languages, the way I was taught, grammar translation method, audio linguistic method, which is okay, but it was very much, we learned French, we had to learn about the present perfect indicative, the predicate, the determiner, all of these labels that you had no idea, and then the rules. And it's totally upside down. It really is. I mean, I recently tried to explain this in a video about grammar, learning grammar, that for me, the process is the opposite. For me, the process is about listening to the language, is about listening to the sound and the music and loving that sound,
right? And
then repeating it so you get a chance to practice repeating, and then later you can go and look at the grammar, and you can go and see, oh, this grammar helps me understand a bit what I've been saying,
right?
So you start with the communication, you start with the sounds. And then later you look at the grammar that can explain things to you. And for me, That you see, that's the way I learned music. I learned to play the guitar when I was young. I learned the violin and the guitar. I taught myself the guitar by listening, by thinking, wow, I want to do that, and trying to play it myself and just imitating.
Yeah.
And then about a year later, I went for classes with a teacher, and she explained notation, musical notation, the scales. And I went, wow, that's amazing. I know that, but I didn't know it. And now I could put the labels to it. And that also helped me. And it was a cycle of going round. And for me, that's much better, because if you start with the grammar, you start with a headache and frustration, and it doesn't help.
Yep, that is so true. Yeah, you're overloaded with rules, It's like you theoretically learning everything that is telling you this is where you could go wrong. So you're already overloaded with information that, different signals that are lighting up in your head. Oh, am I using this tense correctly here or not, etc.? Should I be saying this? Rather than focusing on conveying that message itself first. Here's the interesting thing. My mom taught English literature for 34 years at the local college, and that was partly one of the reasons. Well, I picked up the language a little bit ahead of time as compared to my friends in school. But the interesting part was she had these all books of grammar and rules and everything at home. It never made sense to me. Grammar never made sense to me because it was very confusing. So I would read a lot. I was naturally a very curious person, so I would pick up all these different kinds of books. And then, due to all that reading, I got a sense of what sounds right and what doesn't sound right. It served me well with a margin of error of about 1 or 2%, which is human. I'm not running on artificial intelligence here, right? So
sure, it serves you very, very well. Yeah, you don't need all the labels of grammar and the rules if you've already internalized them, which clearly you have. So you don't need to have to know how to describe it. Grammar is just a way to describe the language.
Right.
It's not the language. It's a way of describing.
Thank you. That's a very powerful statement. It's not the language. Grammar is not the language. Right.
No, it's a way of describing the language.
Absolutely.
Simple as that. And I just want to make a quick shout out to all of the teachers out there, especially the teachers in India. It's not their fault. Right. They are not to blame for this teaching methodology. If you're given a classroom of 50 kids or more, and you're given an assessment system of a test that they have to pass that's based on grammar, of course the teachers are going to start with the grammar and make sure you know the grammar.
Right.
It's not their fault. It's the system of education and assessment and evaluation that needs changing.
Absolutely. Assessment needs changing, definitely. Because it's the same, the method pretty much still the same. They're making innovations here and there now. I think it's radically changing with the new education policy, the NEP 2020, which is talking about cross-disciplinary learning and so on and so forth. A lot of innovation coming there. It still has to be implemented in its entire spirit and letter. So I think once that happens, we will move towards more experimentation and learning mediums, and rather than just so if it's standardized and if it's all fill in the blank, and then students naturally they resort to rote learning, which is not the best way forward for anything. Leave apart learning a new language. Rote learning is dangerous, because you're mugging up something that's worked for somebody several years ago with the assumption it will work for you as well in various situations. It doesn't. Language does not.
The world's changed.
Indeed. We speakers, coaches, and trainers, we've had to adapt to all these new tools here to thrive in a virtual medium, and suddenly everybody knows how to use Zoom, and you work with the cat filters, and some of us still struggle, but
exactly. And it opens up whole new opportunities as well. I mean, education is traditionally something that's very, 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 very slow to change. It's extremely difficult to change. But I think as the world is changing, we are going to see slightly quicker changes with innovation, adaptation, and hopefully benefits for language learning in schools.
I completely agree to that. And one thing I'd like to say here is to our young viewers especially, is to take charge of your education as well. Part of it is entrusted to the government and the decision makers and the policy makers who might not be completely in tune with your future goals, but you are. So therefore, take charge of your learning process. Design your own curriculum. What should you be reading? What should you be watching? who should you be spending time with, so on and so forth. Think about these questions and take charge of it. Once you finish school and college and or get a job, it's not the end of learning. That's one. And even when the day is finished, when you're learning for the day is done with the teachers, you have time to yourself. Use that time well in order to supplement and try things which perhaps school doesn't allow.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. I mean, the language is not contained in your school book, right? The language is much more beyond that. It's much wider. You have to be looking at other things, reading other books, reading poetry. I don't know, you're a big fan of poetry, watching films, engaging with other kinds of speakers. There's so much more. Yeah, and be proactive. I totally agree. A proactive learner is going to learn more deeply. Don't just be passive.
Indeed. You talked about poetry, and the interesting thing here is this: it did not make sense to me when I would memorize them back in school, or Robert Frost stopping by woods on a snowy evening. But now, fast forward 30 years from that, you could if you just pause and reflect, it's so deep, it's so profound. You can connect it with the challenges in your own life, and it's sort of music. It's poetry in its true sense. It's not just a set of words that you were memorizing earlier. Now the words come alive for you, and I think as your understanding deepens, as your learning deepens, that stage automatically happens. Keith, one of your most popular videos on your YouTube channel is interacting with native English speakers. Now, I know this could be a huge challenge. This could make many new learners especially nervous about when they're speaking with someone who's a native English speaker. And with the world that we're living in, that's increasingly global in nature, and people interacting, and from all different corners of the world. There's companies now which don't have a single headquarter; they instead have 5 headquarters across the world. In this new global world, where English is the international language of communication by and large, what are your top tips with people whose first language is not English in interacting with native English speakers? There's 2 challenges in particular that are very common. One is I know the language well, I can read, write, and speak, but when I'm speaking with a native English speaker, I'm suddenly at a loss for words. And second is sometimes I cannot understand what they're saying. So maybe we could split it into 2 questions. Let's begin with this one first. That self-consciousness, or suddenly people are at a loss of words when interacting with a native English speaker.
Right. That's the first aspect. Yeah. It's that loss of words, that confidence to speak out. I think there are several things going on. One of them is maybe the cultural thing. I mean, to communicate effectively with native speakers, they're not all native speakers aren't the same, right? But if you take, for example, American culture or British culture, the way we talk and do things is different from Indian culture or Chinese culture or others.
Right.
I think maybe I'm trying to think of an example to show this, but for example, maybe I can give an example from me being in China and trying to learn Chinese, and the opposite. When I went to China the first time, I went to a very small town. It wasn't Beijing, and this is 20 years ago. China has changed quite a lot. It's a very small town, and I had learned a very basic Chinese, and I trying to communicate. And when somebody was offering me something, and I said no, thank you, and they continued to offer, and I said no, thank you, and I thought, do they not understand me? And they carried on offering and insisting, and I thought, something's wrong here. And I tried to say it another way. I said, well, no, I don't. He was offering me a cigarette. I said, no, I don't smoke, which I'd learned how to say. And he continued. And the cultural thing was, what was going on was that in his culture, when you offer something, you offer again, and you expect the person to be polite and to say no. So you offer again and again. In the British culture, when somebody offers, when they say no, that's it. It's no. It would be rude to offer again,
right?
And it's
implying
you only
that
do it one time.
Implying
time,
that the other person hasn't understood.
If you say no, being polite, you've missed out, because they're not going to offer again. And I think that connection between language and culture, the way we do things, is different. And it's important to try and understand the culture of the language, how people offer, how people invite. You know, you've probably had this in England, come round for dinner sometime. And you go, oh, how about tomorrow? And like, no. And the person's shocked, going, no, I didn't actually mean that. Date. It's just a polite way.
Yeah.
So,
we do that all the time here in India too. We do.
Right, you do the same thing. But sometimes the functions can be different. The way you apologize, the way you offer, invite, the way you accept a gift. The language and the culture are very intricately connected. And I think it's important to try and learn. Well, to learn that is difficult because you need to practice that and be exposed to it. But to be open to that being different, and going back to what we said before, to be open to the fact that if the native speaker doesn't quite follow what you're saying or doing, don't worry about it. You will find a way to communicate. You will find a way to get through. It may be a cultural misunderstanding. And be open to that. So I think, that aspect of being at a loss for words, there's something else that comes to mind, and I think it comes from social media. The idea that the native speaker is perfect and that everybody should try to be like a native speaker. And even though I'm a native thinker, I think students should forget that idea. Don't try and be like a native speaker. It's not necessary. It's not helping you. It's kind of overwhelming you because it's such a difficult goal to reach that if you can say, I just want to be a good speaker or an advanced speaker, then that's enough. And to kind of take away this idea that the native speaker is perfect, it would be like me trying to learn football from Ronaldo, Cristiano. And of course, if he comes and tries to teach me, I'll be overwhelmed. I won't be able to kick the ball. I mean, I can't kick the ball anyway, but it would be difficult. But if I think of, the teacher or the other speaker just being another speaker, not the perfect kind of godlike figure, then
or the judge,
maybe help, or the judge. Nice, yes, exactly, because they don't judge.
They don't. I mean, they want to achieve their goals, and if you're working in an organization, there's a common goal everybody's striving towards, and you're supplying something valuable to that equation. And I think what will help a lot of people is to understand that, especially if you're working in an international global setting, is to understand that you have value to add, and that's why you are in that position where you're in right now. If you wouldn't be there. And that value addition is not dependent upon your linguistic proficiency. It depends upon a lot of other things for which you probably have worked hard for your entire life. We've had the chairman of the Indian Space Research Organization, who was very simple, very humble man, a son of a farmer, who grew up to study and math and science and rose to great heights. The person behind the mission on Mars and so many other initiatives that the world studied for their cost effectiveness for other things. And so we have a lot of role models to look up to understand that, of course, it's very important to be able to convey your ideas well in a way that inspires and informs and engages and entertains at times. But that's not the bottom line. The bottom line, there are a whole lot of other skills that you have, and you can work on this. And the day, whoever you're speaking to, this is my belief, it helped me a lot in overcoming whatever doubts I might have had, is the person on the other side of the table, the day they can speak your language with the same level of efficiency and fluency and grammatically correct way, and without hesitation to you, that's when you can say, okay, my friend, we're on an equal footing now. up and other than that,
absolutely. I remember, stuff that I've done, the trick that I've used, and it really is a trick, is that when I've been speaking a foreign language to somebody, a counterpart, I always try and start the conversation, and I try and control very early on the conversation, even though I'm the language learner,
right?
Because it enables two things. It enables me to get a bit of confidence as I'm speaking first, And it enables the other person to realize very quickly what my level is. And that person listening will very quickly go, oh, actually, his English or his Chinese is quite low. I need to moderate the way I speak.
Right.
And that helps. I think the worst thing you can do is to be passive and to just listen and then get more nervous. And when finally you have to speak, you're incredibly nervous. You're thinking, they don't know I'm a beginner. And so go in first. Get control of the conversation really early on.
Great tip there. Yeah.
I think that helps me.
Indeed, that's a great tip, because you're not sort of hiding it. You're not sweeping it under the carpet. You're not waiting for. So if they probably might be assuming you understanding everything, especially if you're nodding your head and giving verbal signals. And towards the end of that, when they ask you a question or something, then you're at a loss for words. That would be more dangerous, and it would waste everybody's time. So I like what you said there, is to go in early, take initiative, so that the other person can also have a good sense of where your linguistic ability is and change accordingly. Thank you so much, Keith. You've been so generous with your time and sharing all this practical information. One last question before we let you go is, what are your top tips in terms of if viewers could do 3 things and do them well and do them consistently to improve communication skills and English language, what 3 things from your experience would you recommend?
Wow, good question. Top 3. There are so many. Let me try and prioritize. I think for language learning and communication skills, well, with language learning, try and study regularly in short boosts over a long period of time. Okay.
Right.
I think sometimes people think, well, I'll study on Saturday for 10 hours and then do nothing for 2 weeks. That doesn't help. Having a regular time, ideally the same time each day, even if it's 10 minutes, repeating, because that regular interaction is the way languages are learned. It enables you to review stuff as well and have that regular contact. And it goes back to atomic habits, James Clear, that habit, the cue, like it's 10 o'clock as your cue. It's time for English. You're there and you're ready. So I think that would be the kind of the study habit, maybe the first thing. When it comes to actually practicing the language, one thing I would say is to focus on on building vocabulary. Right. And I have a method for this, for which is, maybe I can introduce it very quickly.
Sure.
And it's basically, there are 4 steps to this, to learning how to speak. The first one is to try.
Right.
The second one is to discover. The third is to practice, and the 4th is to build. And the idea is that to try is when you want to say something or answer a question or talk about a topic, you try talking about it. You use the language you have to say something. And what that does is it gets your brain ready and to start talking. It also identifies the gaps. You're trying to say things and there's a gap and you think, oh, how do I say that? And so your mind is ready for learning. Then in step 2, you discover and you listen or read or look at something that is on the same topic or the same language, and you start learning different phrases that may fill the gaps. And then in step 3, you start to practice. You take some of those words and vocabulary from context, and you start practicing that language, repeating it, repeating it and making sentences that are true for you. And then in the 4th step, you build flexibility, and you go back to the topic or the question and try and answer as much as you can, different contexts, different language, building your flexibility. And I just think that cycle of trying, discovering and practicing and building can really help over a long term, as we mentioned, kind of build up your speaking ability. So I would recommend that approach.
Sure. So that's try, discover, build.
Practice.
Try, discover, build, and practice. Okay.
Try, discover, practice, and build.
Practice and build. Okay. Try, discover, practice, and build. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
And it starts with try. I like that. So it's not starting with the theoretical discovery of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. It's very practical. It's exponential learning, basically. Yes.
That's great.
So yeah, that's it. And anything else? I don't know how we're doing for time. Communication, I was thinking about. Communication skills. I don't know. I found in my travels going around the world, living in different countries, it's inevitable that you're going to be comparing your own language and your own customs to what's happening in the country. When the comparisons come, I try and avoid being negative, or I try and catch myself if I am being negative.
Agreed.
You know, you go to a country and you go, well, why is the food so spicy? Why is the weather so bad? Why do they say things like this? And you're being negative about it. And I think to try and catch yourself to be curious rather than be negative, as the famous Ted Lasso said, be curious about why people do things. Yeah. And that can help you actually understand, think, oh, the reason they say that is because in their culture they do this. And that curiosity can really help with that communication, cross-culture communication, I think.
Oh, well said, man. I believe that's the entire purpose of travel, is to broaden your thinking, to welcome other points of view.
Yes.
If you travel and you still come back with the same perspective, you didn't really travel. You just moved geographically from one place to another. You didn't absorb all those influences. And, from a language perspective, I remember this is very interesting. A leading international speaker was presenting in Bahrain, and I happened to be part of the audience because I was delivering a keynote the day before, and I figured out he's delivering a talk here. So I said to a common friend of mine, can you arrange me a ticket? He was actually the sponsor. He was sponsoring his visit. So I said, sure, VIP ticket for you. So I was there. So this gentleman, top of his game, right, in leadership coaching, and he spends 3 or 4 hours sharing some very powerful material on that. And the audience reaction is, okay, they're with him, they're understanding, they're playing along. And then comes a native Arabic speaker on stage to translate something for him. He actually invited him. He said, can you come on stage and translate this in Arabic? And that was the first time in 3 hours that I heard this audience of 800 laugh, and their faces lit up. It was a different level of understanding. And I, as an observer, thought, this gap perhaps will always be there. We could cover it in time. If we're learning another language, we could perhaps get to that level where we could also connect so deeply, so effectively to light up their faces and bring a smile and make them laugh. But before that, we have to understand that there is going to be some distance to travel, and we should be okay with it, and still give it our best. This has been a very enriching conversation, Keith. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Simerjeet. It's been very, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Likewise. And I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, let me point out that for further learning and to stay in touch with Keith, his website is called Keith Speaking Academy. You'll find the links in the description. His YouTube channel, which I highly recommend you go check it out, is called English Speaking Success. Tons of very nice videos over there that you will find very useful. Keith, thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Simerjeet. It's been an honor. It's been really interesting. Thank you so much. And take care. All the best to all of your audience and students out there.
Thank you, sir.
Keep on learning. Keep enjoying your learning.
Thank you. And you keep publishing those wonderful, very helpful videos. And thank you once again.
I will do. Thank you. Take care.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye-bye. Bye.